She paid for her first-class seat fair and square, but a white passenger demanded she give it up, just because she didn't look like she belonged. What happened next? No one on that plane will ever forget. The airport was unusually crowded for a Tuesday afternoon. Families rushed past with oversized luggage, business travelers clutched briefcases while checking their watches, and over the intercom, another gate change was announced for the fifth time in 10 minutes. Among the movement and noise, 16-year-old Maya Johnson stood quietly near gate C-27, holding her boarding pass and listening to music through one earbud. She was traveling alone for the first time, flying home after spending a week at a youth leadership program in Washington, D.C. Her mother had dropped her off at the airport, but it was her father who would be picking her up back home. And even though Maya missed him deeply, she was proud of herself for handling the trip solo. Her seat assignment: 3A, first class. Maya hadn't told anyone on the trip that her father worked for the FBI, let alone that he was a special agent in charge. He was strict about privacy and had taught her that people should respect others not because of titles, but because it's the right thing to do. When the flight began boarding, Maya waited patiently for her group to be called. A few glances followed her as she stepped forward, something she had gotten used to. A young black girl in first class? Some people acted like it was impossible. Once on board, Maya made her way to row 3. She gently placed her small backpack in the overhead bin and slid into the plush, leather seat by the window. She was adjusting her seatbelt when she heard it. A voice. Sharp, annoyed. Entitled. "Excuse me," the woman said loudly. "That seat is mine." Maya looked up to see a tall white woman, maybe in her early 50s, standing in the aisle in full designer attire, perfectly styled blonde hair, glossy purse, and a blazer with initials embroidered into the cuff. She was glaring down at Maya with a furrowed brow and tight lips. Maya offered a polite smile. "Oh, sorry, this is 3A, right?" "Yes," the woman snapped. "And I believe that seat belongs to me." Maya held up her boarding pass. "I'm in 3A too." "It's on my ticket." The woman didn't even glance at it. She crossed her arms and spoke louder now, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "That can't be right. Maybe you wandered into the wrong section, sweetheart." "Coach" is down the aisle. Several heads turned. A businessman 2 rows back peeked over his newspaper. A flight attendant paused her safety checks. Maya's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "I scanned my ticket at the gate. The agent told me to go to 3A. This is my assigned seat," the woman scoffed. "I don't care what you think the gate agent said. You don't belong up here. They probably made a mistake." Maya's chest clenched. She felt her cheeks burn, not with embarrassment, but with the sting of being treated like she didn't belong. Not because she was rude or unqualified, but simply because she was young, black, and sitting somewhere this woman didn't expect her to be. "Ma'am," Maya said gently, "I really don't want to argue with you. Maybe we can ask the flight attendant to double-check." But the woman wasn't interested in logic. She took a step closer, her voice rising again. "You need to move. Right now, before I call someone to escort you to where you actually belong." That last word, belong, hung in the air like poison. Maya blinked, heart pounding. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed all the rules. And yet, here she was, being challenged for simply sitting where she was assigned. And that's when she did the one thing she rarely ever did. She called her dad. As the woman kept ranting, Maya quietly unlocked her phone, turned her body slightly toward the window, and hit the contact labeled, "Dad, FBI." He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, I'm on the plane." "But there's a problem." She spoke softly, but her voice carried the kind of steady calm her father had taught her since she was 5 years old. Outside the cabin door, the final passengers were still boarding. Inside, things were about to take a dramatic turn, and no one, especially the woman standing over Maya, was prepared for who was about to walk down that jet bridge. "Tell me exactly what's happening," her father said, his voice firm, measured, just like always. Maya kept her voice low, trying not to let the growing crowd of curious eyes distract her. "There's a woman here. She's saying I'm in her seat, 3A. I showed her my boarding pass, but she won't look. She said, I don't belong here." On the other end of the line, there was a beat of silence. She could practically hear her dad's jaw clenching. "Is she threatening you?" "No," Maya replied. "But she's being loud. Really loud. And rude." Behind her, the woman crossed her arms and barked to the nearest flight attendant. "Can someone please remove this child from my seat? I paid for first class. Not to deal with confusion. And attitude." The flight attendant, a young man in his early 20s, hurried over, clearly caught between confusion and discomfort. "Hi, ma'am. Let's take a breath here," he said, holding up both hands. "I'm sure we can get this sorted." The woman pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Maya. "This girl is in my seat. I've flown this airline for years. I know what I booked." The attendant turned to Maya, who remained seated, still on the phone. "Miss," he said more gently, "may I see your boarding pass?" Without hesitation, Maya handed it over. The attendant glanced down, his brow furrowed. First class. This is correct," he murmured, then looked up at the woman. "Ma'am, this seat is assigned to her." "What?" the woman hissed. "That's not possible. She must have switched seats, or someone at the gate made a mistake." Maya's father was still on the phone. "I'm at the airport," he said quickly. "What's the gate number?" "C-27, Maya whispered. "I'll be there in less than 2 minutes." Maya felt a strange mix of reassurance and dread settle over her. Her father had always been protective, but when he was in FBI mode, he didn't tolerate nonsense. And once he saw how this woman had spoken to his daughter, things would escalate quickly. The woman, meanwhile, was far from done. "I don't care what your system says," she snapped at the attendant. "People like her don't fly first class." A collective hush fell across the cabin. The businessman with the newspaper slowly lowered it. A couple across the aisle gasped audibly. Even the attendant took half a step back. Maya looked down, trying to hide the sting in her eyes. She wasn't ashamed, but the words hit hard, even if she'd heard similar ones whispered before. This time, they were said out loud, in front of strangers, as if she was less than. The woman wasn't finished. "I've spent enough money with this airline to deserve better treatment. Do you know how many flights I've taken this year alone? And now I'm being forced to sit next to—" She didn't finish that sentence, because at that moment, the front of the cabin shifted. A tall man in a dark blue suit appeared at the entrance, badge clipped to his belt, expression stone cold. It was Special Agent Marcus Johnson, Maya's dad. He spotted her instantly, still seated, phone in hand. Their eyes met. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. The woman, noticing the shift in energy, turned around, just in time to see him walking up the aisle, eyes locked on her. "Excuse me," he said, flashing his credentials to the stunned flight crew. "FBI, that's my daughter you're yelling at." The color drained from the woman's face. She blinked once, then again. "You," she stammered. "You're her father." Maya leaned back in her seat, calm once again. She knew what came next. And this woman? She was about to learn that the seat she wanted came with a whole lot more than just legroom. The cabin went completely still. The woman's mouth hung slightly open, her eyes flicking between Marcus Johnson's FBI badge and the calm, steady face of the teenage girl she had just tried to humiliate. Her hands, once defiantly placed on her hips, now trembled slightly as she lowered them. Special Agent Marcus Johnson stepped fully into the first-class section, towering over the rows with a presence that didn't need to raise its voice to command the room. Every passenger nearby leaned slightly forward, curious, watching this real-life moment unfold like a courtroom drama. He turned to Maya. "You all right?" She nodded, her voice clear despite the tension. "I'm fine, Dad. She wouldn't believe my seat was mine. She said I didn't belong here." Marcus turned to the flight attendant, who was now clutching Maya's boarding pass like a sacred document. The young man looked flustered. "Sir, she's definitely assigned to 3A. I confirmed it twice. The other passenger, just wouldn't accept it." Marcus nodded, slow and deliberate, before turning to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but cutting, "what made you think my daughter wasn't allowed to sit here?" The woman's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She was pale now, visibly sweating. I just assumed. She's young, and most teenagers don't fly first class alone. I didn't mean anything by it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean anything by it?" She fumbled with her designer handbag. "It was a misunderstanding, that's all. I didn't know that she was black or that she was in first class." The words weren't loud, but they hit like thunder. Ripple moved through the cabin. The older couple in row 2 exchanged glances. The businessman from earlier shook his head in quiet disbelief. The woman's jaw trembled. "Sir, I didn't know she was your daughter." Marcus leaned in slightly, lowering his voice even more. "And if she wasn't my daughter, would it have been okay for you to treat her like that? Because what I saw, and what the other passengers witnessed, wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was public humiliation based on bias." The woman looked ready to shrink into her seat. But she was still standing, still between Maya and the aisle. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. I thought the system got it wrong." "No," Marcus said, voice like steel. "You saw a young black girl in a seat you didn't think she earned, and your instinct was to try and remove her. You didn't ask questions. You made assumptions. Loud ones." A few passengers began nodding subtly. The truth was uncomfortable, but no one could deny it. The flight attendant spoke up nervously. "Sir, ma'am, I think it's best if we de-escalate. We can still seat everyone and be on time." Marcus didn't look away from the woman. "I'm not here to escalate anything. I'm here to make it very clear. If you had spoken to my daughter this way, outside of an airplane, I'd be pressing charges for verbal harassment and discrimination. You're lucky this happened somewhere I can be calm about it." The woman took a slow, shaky step back. I'm sorry." Maya hadn't said a word. She just sat there, composed, hands folded in her lap, exactly the way her father had taught her to respond when others questioned her place in the world. Marcus finally broke his gaze and turned to Maya. "You staying in 3A?" She smiled, faint but steady. "Yes, sir." He nodded, then looked at the attendant. "Thank you for confirming her seat. I trust we're good now?" The attendant nodded quickly, eyes wide. "Yes, sir. Absolutely. We'll be departing shortly." The woman mumbled one last apology before shuffling to a different row, somewhere far behind them, in coach. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Maya exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment drift out of her chest. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder, just a light squeeze, and gave her a look that said everything. "You handled that with strength. I'm proud of you." And though the plane had yet to take off, Maya knew one thing for sure. This flight would leave with more than just passengers. It would carry a lesson some would never forget. As the woman disappeared down the aisle, escorted by a second flight attendant to a new seat in economy, a hush lingered in the air around Maya like a mist. No one spoke. No one needed to. The moment had said it all. Maya sank deeper into her seat. Her father stood beside her for a moment longer, scanning the cabin like he was still on duty. Eventually, he gave her a nod and turned toward the front exit. "Text me when you land," he said. "I'll be waiting at the gate." "I will," Maya replied, her voice soft but steady. As he exited the aircraft, Maya felt a renewed sense of calm settle over her. Her dad's presence was like armor, silent, strong, and unshakable. But now that he was gone, she could feel her hands trembling, just a little, not from fear, but from the emotional aftermath of what had just unfolded in front of 24 strangers. The seat beside her, 3B, remained empty for a moment. Then a flight attendant gently guided a woman in her late 30s to it. She offered Maya a polite smile as she settled in. "I saw what happened," the woman said quietly, adjusting her seatbelt. "You handled that with a lot more grace than I would have." Maya smiled faintly. "Thanks." "She was out of line," the woman added. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, especially so publicly." Maya nodded. She'd heard those kinds of apologies before, from strangers, classmates, even teachers. People always said sorry after the damage had been done, but few ever challenged the ones doing the damage when it mattered. "Thank you," Maya said again, more sincerely. This time, as the aircraft door closed and the engines hummed to life, Maya stared out the window. The tarmac outside shimmered beneath the late afternoon sun. Her thoughts drifted, not to the woman who tried to humiliate her, but to all the kids like her who'd been told they didn't belong somewhere. In school halls, on basketball, courts, in debate clubs, at internships, and now, on airplanes. How many had stayed silent? How many had moved out of their seats even when they knew they were right, just to avoid conflict? She tightened her grip on her phone. Not today. Not this time. A voice crackled through the speakers overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're about to begin our taxi toward the runway. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." The flight attendant passed by again, this time stopping at Maya's row. "Would you like something to drink once we're in the air?" he asked, his tone much gentler now. "Just water," Maya replied. He gave her a respectful nod and moved on. The woman next to her leaned slightly toward Maya and whispered, "I think your dad made quite an impression." Maya chuckled quietly. He usually does. As the plane lifted from the ground, the view outside shifted, buildings shrinking, cars turning to dots, roads like thin grey veins stretching through the city. Maya always loved this part of flying. It felt like rising above the noise, the judgment, the expectations. Somewhere below, the woman who had tried to shame her was probably sitting rigid in a cramped row, doing her best to pretend none of it had happened. But Maya would carry the moment differently, not as pain, but as proof. Proof that she had every right to take up space, to speak up, to hold her seat. And as the clouds drifted by outside her window, she realized something even more powerful. The world might keep trying to tell her where she doesn't belong, but she would keep showing up anyway. Seat 3A wasn't just a seat. Today, it had become a symbol, and Maya Johnson had claimed it. With poise, with courage, and with witnesses who would never forget. The plane cruised smoothly above the clouds now, sunlight pouring in through the window in soft golden streaks. Maya leaned her head back, finally allowing her muscles to relax. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a heavy calm. She wasn't tired, but she was emotionally full, like her spirit had been stretched and then slowly settled back into place. She reached for her journal, small, leather-bound, a gift from her father on her last birthday, and flipped it open to a blank page. "You belong wherever you choose to be." She wrote the sentence slowly, deliberately, like it was a mantra she never wanted to forget. Beside her, the woman in 3B sipped quietly from her ginger ale. After a few minutes, she glanced at Maya again. "If you don't mind me asking, is your dad really in the FBI?" Maya nodded. "Yeah, he's a special agent. Has been since before I was born." The woman raised her eyebrows, impressed. "Wow, that explains a lot." "Like what?" Maya asked, tilting her head. "Well," the woman smiled. "You stayed calm. Most teenagers would have either cried or exploded after being treated the way you were. But you held your ground, with dignity. That takes more than confidence. It takes training." Maya gave a small laugh. "He's definitely trained me in a few things." There was a brief silence, but it was comfortable. The hum of the engine and the clink of glasses from the galley filled the background like a steady rhythm. "You know," the woman continued, "I work in education. I've seen a lot of young people deal with unfairness in different ways. But what happened back there?" She shook her head. "It was pure bias. And you handled it better than most adults I know." Maya's smile faded slightly. "It happens. More than you think. Sometimes it's just stares, sometimes whispers. Today, it was out loud." The woman's face softened. "That shouldn't be normal. I'm so sorry." Maya closed her journal. "I'm used to being underestimated, but I'm also used to proving people wrong." The woman smiled again, this time with something that looked like admiration. "You will go far. You know that, right?" Maya nodded, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The woman's words weren't compliments. They were confirmations. Things she already believed about herself. A short while later, the flight attendant returned with a warm meal tray. As he placed the food in front of Maya, he leaned down and whispered, "I just wanted to say thank you for staying calm earlier. I should have handled it better from the start." Maya looked up, surprised. "I didn't step in fast enough," he added. "And I regret that." Her expression softened. "It's okay. You did speak up, and now you know what to look for next time." He nodded, visibly moved. "You're right. Thank you." As he walked away, Maya felt something settle inside her, a quiet satisfaction. Not from revenge or public victory, but from knowing she'd stayed true to herself in a moment, designed to shake her. The rest of the flight passed in peaceful conversation, quiet reflection, and the occasional glance out the window at the ever-changing sky. Below them, the world continued on, unaware of the lesson that had just taken place among strangers in a metal tube suspended over the earth. But for those on board, especially the ones who witnessed it all, it was a story they'd likely tell for years. And for Maya, this wasn't just a story. It was her seat, her voice, her moment, and she owned it. As the captain's voice echoed through the cabin, announcing their descent and clear skies ahead, Maya straightened in her seat and slipped her journal back into her backpack. Her mind, though quieter than before, still buzzed with everything that had unfolded. From the outside, she looked like any teen flying home, but inside, she carried a story that had cracked something open, not just in the rude woman who tried to displace her, but in the people around her who had watched and chosen whether to speak or stay silent. The woman in 3B leaned over one last time. "Have you thought about sharing your story? Writing about it?" Maya blinked. "You mean like on social media?" The woman smiled. "Wherever you want. I think it would help a lot of people, and it might remind others to think before they speak." Maya nodded slowly, considering it. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but something about the idea felt right. Maybe this moment wasn't just hers to carry. Maybe it was one to pass on. The plane touched down with a soft jolt, wheels skimming across the runway with the graceful power of a landing perfected by repetition. As they taxied toward the gate, Maya looked out the window and saw her city inching closer, terminal buildings, security vehicles, blinking signals. And somewhere beyond those gates, her father was waiting. She pulled out her phone and tapped a quick message. Landed safely. I'll see you soon. The plane reached the gate, and the familiar ding signaled everyone to unbuckle. Passengers began the usual scramble, grabbing bags, stretching legs, avoiding eye contact. Maya stayed seated, letting the crowd rush forward. As she gathered her thoughts, as she stood and retrieved her bag from the overhead bin, the same flight attendant approached her quietly. "Miss Johnson," he said, "thank you again for your patience. If it's all right with you, I'd like to file an internal report about what happened. That woman's behavior. It shouldn't go unaddressed." Maya looked him in the eye. He seemed nervous, but sincere. "I think that's the right thing to do," she said. "Not for me, just for the next person like me who boards." He gave her a small, grateful nod. "You're not just brave. You're wise." Maya smiled, but said nothing. As she exited the jet bridge and stepped into the terminal, she immediately spotted him. Agent Marcus Johnson, still in his sharp navy blue suit, though now with the tie loosened, hands folded patiently in front of him, his expression unreadable. But when he saw Maya, the corners of his eyes crinkled. Relief. She walked straight into his arms. He embraced her tightly, one hand over her shoulder, the other resting protectively behind her head. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she whispered into his chest. I held my ground. I saw. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I'm proud of you. Not because of what I do, but because of who you are." Maya swallowed the emotion welling in her throat. She nodded. Together they walked toward baggage claim, their steps slow and steady. People passed by, some in uniform, others in suits, families in vacation wear. But Maya didn't feel small among them. She felt solid, rooted. In a world that tried to shrink people like her, to box them into stereotypes, to steal their space, she had taken her place, unapologetically. And as they reached the escalator, her father looked down at her, voice low, but certain. "You know," he said, "that woman thought she could shame you into silence. Instead, she gave you a platform." Maya smiled. "Yeah, I think I'm going to use it." They stepped onto the escalator, descending into the busy hum of the airport below. She was no longer just the girl in seat 3A. She was the voice that wouldn't be ignored. Later that evening, after a long shower and a warm dinner at home, Maya lay on her bed scrolling through her phone. She hadn't planned on telling anyone about what happened, but the moment kept replaying in her mind. Not just the confrontation, but the weight of what it represented. She opened her notes app and began typing. Not a rant, not a viral post, just the truth. "Today, I boarded a plane with a first-class ticket and was told, loudly and publicly, that I didn't belong there. I was told to move. I was told I must have made a mistake. And when I tried to stand my ground, I was spoken to like I was invisible. I stayed calm. I knew my worth. But what struck me most wasn't her anger. It was how easily people go silent when they see something wrong. I didn't belong in her eyes because I didn't fit her idea of first class. But let me be clear. I belong in every room, every row, every space I've earned. And if you've ever been told otherwise, don't shrink. Hold your seat. You've earned it too." Maya Johnson. She sat with the message for a moment, then copied it into her Instagram, attaching a quiet photo she had taken mid-flight. Her boarding pass resting beside her journal, sunlight hitting the edge of the tray table. She hit post, no hashtags, no filters, just her truth. Within minutes, the likes started appearing. Then comments, then reposts. By midnight, the post had been shared over 6,000 times. By morning, it was on Twitter, LinkedIn, and even in Facebook groups her dad followed, and the caption that many reshared became a rallying cry. Hold your seat. Meanwhile, across the city, in a suburban neighborhood tucked behind manicured hedges, the woman from the plane sat stiffly at her kitchen table. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Her name wasn't mentioned in Maya's post. No photos had been taken of her. But the story, the tone, the setting, the entitlement was unmistakable. One of her friends had sent her a link to a news headline, Teen Faces First-Class Discrimination, but her response sets the internet on fire. Another text came through. Is this about you? People are saying it's your flight. She set the phone down, heart pounding. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the narrative. And the seat she'd so desperately tried to take, it now belonged to a girl with a voice louder than a cabin full of whispers. Back at Maya's house, her dad entered the room holding a mug of tea. You've been quiet, he said, noticing the glow of her screen. She turned the phone toward him, showing the numbers climbing. I posted what happened. Marcus took a sip, watching the screen, then looking back at his daughter. You sure you're ready for this attention? She nodded. It's not just for me. I want people to know they're not alone. That it's okay to speak up, even when your voice shakes. He smiled, pride softening his face. Then I think you've already made a bigger impact than you realize. She wasn't chasing fame. She didn't care about the views. But something about the way people were reacting, the messages saying, this happened to me too, or thank you for saying, what I couldn't, made her realize this wasn't just about a seat. It was about the story of being seen, and Maya had just taken the first step in making sure no one else had to feel invisible again. By the end of the second day, Maya's post had been viewed over 2 million times. Influencers shared it. Educators reposted it. Even a few celebrities dropped comments like, this is why we need to keep telling our stories. Maya, thank you for using your voice. And under all the reposts and reactions, one message kept appearing. Hold your seat, it started, as a simple phrase. But now, it was everywhere. People were using it to share their own stories, moments they had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, and how they chose not to back down. A woman in London posted a story about being mistaken for the assistant. In her own office, a black teen in Atlanta shared a photo of her math competition medal, captioned, "They thought I was just there to watch. I took first place instead." Maya scrolled through them with a stunned kind of awe. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't even tried to go viral. But now her experience was sparking a wave of voices, louder, braver, together. Across the hall, her father was on a Zoom call with a civil rights advocacy group. He'd been invited to speak on workplace bias and public profiling, topics he had lived through both as a federal agent and now as a father. He waved her over toward the end of the call. You've inspired more than just students, he told her after logging off. There are policy groups referencing your story now. Conversations are happening that weren't before. Maya blinked. All that because of a seat? No, he said gently. Because of what you did when someone tried to take it. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. A delivery person handed over a small padded envelope addressed to Maya. No sender name, just a postmark from New York. Inside was a handwritten note on crisp, ivory paper. The handwriting was elegant. Almost too perfect. Dear Maya, I was on your flight. A few rows back. I didn't say anything when that woman was berating you. I wanted to. I was shocked. But I stayed quiet. And I've regretted it every day since. Your courage forced me to reflect on my silence. And I'm determined to do better next time. Thank you for not backing down. You reminded me that real strength isn't loud. It's steady. Wishing you every success. A passenger who finally sees clearly. Maya held the letter in her hands, reading it twice. Then she folded it, placed it inside her journal, and wrote a single line beneath today's date. Silence is easy, change is not. But someone has to go first. That night, her school principal called. Maya, she said warmly, I've been seeing the story everywhere. The school board wants to invite you to speak at our student leadership conference next month. Maya froze. Me? Speak? You already are, the principal replied with a smile in her voice. We just want to give you a bigger microphone. She hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. All this because one woman saw her as out of place. And instead of shrinking, Maya had stood her ground. What began as a painful moment on a plane had become a movement in motion, a ripple that reached phones, hearts, classrooms, and even conference stages. And as she drifted off to sleep, phone buzzing with one more message that read, "Thank you for making me feel seen," she knew deep down the seat she had fought to keep wasn't just hers anymore. It now belonged to every person who had been told to move. And finally decided to stay. By the end of the second day, Maya's post had been viewed over 2 million times. Influencers shared it. Educators reposted it. Even a few celebrities dropped comments like, "This is why we need to keep telling our stories. Maya, thank you for using your voice." And under all the reposts and reactions, one message kept appearing. Hold your seat. It started as a simple phrase, but now it was everywhere. People were using it to share their own stories, moments they had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, and how they chose not to back down. A woman in London posted a story about being mistaken for the assistant in her own office. A black teen in Atlanta shared a photo of her math competition medal. Captioned, "They thought I was just there to watch. I took first place instead." Maya scrolled through them with a stunned kind of awe. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't even tried to go viral. But now her experience was sparking a wave of voices, louder, braver, together. Across the hall, her father was on a Zoom call with a civil rights advocacy group. He'd been invited to speak on workplace bias and public profiling, topics he had lived through both as a federal agent and now as a father. He waved her over toward the end of the call. "You've inspired more than just students," he told her after logging off. "There are policy groups referencing your story now. Conversations are happening that weren't before." Maya blinked. "All that because of a seat?" "No," he said gently. "Because of what you did when someone tried to take it." Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. A delivery person handed over a small padded envelope addressed to Maya. No sender name, just a postmark from New York. Inside was a handwritten note on crisp, ivory paper. The handwriting was elegant. Almost too perfect. "Dear Maya, I was on your flight. A few rows back. I didn't say anything when that woman was berating you. I wanted to. I was shocked. But I stayed quiet. And I've regretted it every day since. Your courage forced me to reflect on my silence, and I'm determined to do better next time. Thank you for not backing down. You reminded me that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. Wishing you every success. A passenger who finally sees clearly." Maya held the letter in her hands, reading it twice. Then she folded it, placed it inside her journal, and wrote a single line beneath today's date. Silence is easy, change is not. But someone has to go first. That night, her school principal called. "Maya," she said warmly, "I've been seeing the story everywhere. The school board wants to invite you to speak at our student leadership conference next month." Maya froze. "Me? Speak? You already are," the principal replied with a smile in her voice. "We just want to give you a bigger microphone." She hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. All this because one woman saw her as out of place. And instead of shrinking, Maya had stood her ground. What began as a painful moment on a plane had become a movement in motion, a ripple that reached phones, hearts, classrooms, and even conference stages. And as she drifted off to sleep, phone buzzing with one more message that read, "Thank you for making me feel seen." She knew deep down the seat she had fought to keep wasn't just hers anymore. It now belonged to every person who had been told to move and finally decided to stay. Over the next week, Maya's story became more than just a trending topic. It became a symbol. National news outlets ran headlines like, "Teens Calm, Response to Discrimination Becomes Rallying." Cry, "Hold your seat. Daughter of FBI agent inspires youth movement after first-class showdown." Interviews followed. First, it was a morning news segment, then a podcast hosted by a former senator, then a panel invite for a youth advocacy summit. Every time Maya spoke, she brought the same message. It's not just about seats on a plane. It's about the spaces people think we don't deserve to occupy. And every time she told her story, it was a little easier. Not because it hurt less, but because she'd taken ownership of it. It no longer belonged to the woman who tried to shame her. It belonged to her, and to everyone who had lived through something similar. One afternoon, Maya visited her old middle school. The principal had asked her to speak with a group of 8th graders, many of whom had already seen her video clips online. As she stood before a quiet classroom of wide-eyed students, she asked a simple question. Has anyone here ever felt invisible? Nearly every hand went up. She paused, letting the silence settle, then smiled softly. Me too. She told them about the flight, the confrontation, the assumptions. But more importantly, she told them how she stayed composed, not because she wasn't angry, but because she knew who she was, even when someone else tried to define her. One student raised her hand shyly. "Were you scared?" Maya thought for a moment. "I was, but courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you act anyway." After the session, a teacher pulled her aside. "You've done more with this story in 2 weeks than most people do in a lifetime." Maya smiled, humbled but grounded. "I didn't plan this. I just didn't want to stay quiet anymore." And it was true. She hadn't gone looking for a movement, but the movement had found her because her story had struck a nerve buried deep in so many people. The experience of being overlooked, underestimated, and told without words that you don't belong. Meanwhile, the airline released a formal statement acknowledging the incident. They apologized publicly to Maya and announced a new, bias-free training protocol for all crew and gate staff, inspired in part by the events on Flight 882. The woman from the plane never came forward publicly, but Maya didn't need her name. The message had already outgrown the moment, and surprisingly, Maya didn't feel hatred toward her anymore. Only clarity. She wasn't just wrong about me, she was wrong about how the world works now. Because this generation, they weren't sitting quietly anymore. They were standing up, speaking out, and holding their seats with pride. One evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her father, Maya reflected on it all. "I used to think being strong meant saying nothing," she said. Marcus looked up from his mug of coffee. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think strength is saying something, clearly, calmly, and when it matters most." He nodded. "That's how you change things." And she had. More than either of them could have imagined. Not by yelling, not by pushing, but by not moving when the world tried to shove her out of place. By holding her seat, and in doing so, she had created a space big enough for others to sit beside her. Not just in first class, but in boardrooms, classrooms, stages, studios, offices, everywhere. The following month, Maya stood backstage at a packed student leadership summit. The audience was filled with hundreds of high schoolers from across the country, students of every background, color, and story. Some wore blazers, some wore hoodies, but every face carried the same look of anticipation. The host's voice echoed through the auditorium. Please welcome Maya Johnson, activist, writer, and founder of the Yurjok Hold Your Seat movement. Applause thundered as she stepped into the spotlight. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from purpose. She walked to the podium, took a breath, and looked out at the sea of eyes. This all started with a plane ride, she began. A stranger saw me, made a decision about who I was, and tried to take away a seat I had already earned. The room was silent, focused. But instead of moving, she continued, voice steady, I stayed. Not because I was trying to start something, but because I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. She paused, letting the moment land. And when I posted about it, I learned something incredible. People everywhere have been told to move, told they don't belong, told to shrink. And I want to tell you what I told myself that day. She leaned forward slightly. You belong. Wherever you show up prepared, passionate, and purposeful, you belong. And if someone tries to push you out, you don't owe them your silence. You owe yourself the truth. And the truth is, you earned your seat. A standing ovation erupted. But it wasn't for her alone. It was for every story like hers. For every kid who had been dismissed, doubted, or diminished, and chose to stand. Anyway, backstage, her dad waited. He wasn't in his suit this time. Just a button-up and jeans. But he still stood tall, arms crossed, watching her like she was his greatest case solved. You killed it, he said with a grin as she approached. I didn't faint, she teased. So I'd say that's a win. He pulled her into a hug. I always knew you were a force. Now the world knows it too. A week later, a letter arrived. It came from the airline where everything had started. Inside was an official notice. A scholarship fund had been established in Maya's name. The Maya Johnson Hold Your Seat initiative, awarded annually to young leaders who challenge bias and build equity in their communities. Maya stared at the page, silent. Her name, attached not to pain, but to progress. She smiled slowly. Now that's a seat worth giving away. Months passed. Then a year. Maya's story was printed in textbooks, referenced in college essays, quoted in keynote speeches. Not because she'd yelled the loudest, but because she'd chosen to stay. Grounded when it mattered most. And still, whenever she flew, she kept the same habit. Boarding calmly, finding her seat, and pulling out her journal just before takeoff. Row 3A wasn't always her seat, but that flight, that moment, had made it hers forever. Not because of the location, but because of the lesson. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just means staying in your seat, with your head high, your voice steady, and your purpose clear. And somewhere out there, another young girl was boarding her first flight, clutching a boarding pass, not knowing the storm she might face, but ready because someone else had gone first and left her a seat.